Welcome to this historic Homes of Cheshire presentation by Barry Emery. This presentation was originally given in 2015 at the Basswater Grill, but it was not recorded. So I am recording it now using Zoom and will be put up on YouTube. We're going to look at homes built from the year 1768 to 1860. 1768 is the earliest home built in the area of New Providence. Most of these homes still exist. Some have disappeared, but they had such historical significance that I will share them with you. It's primarily a photographic review of each home. However, I will add historical commentary to give you some background information. The homes are spread around the town, but we're going to begin up near Stafford Hill with the oldest home in Cheshire. It was built in 1768 by Joseph Bennett. Joseph Bennett and Nicholas Cook were the two men that bought the property known as New Providence. Bennett came to the area and built this home. He saved the best 300 acres for himself. Nicholas Cook never came to the area, ended up staying in Rhode Island, and eventually became a governor. Notice the three doors and the dormers. Here's a description from the 1885 history of Cheshire about the view from the house. With three front doors and its dormer windows, from which one has a charming view of the winding Hoosic, the distant village, the large reservoir shimmering in the sunshine, while in the far distance, the mountains of southern Berkshire loom up in dreamy indistinctiveness. Bennett sure picked a very nice piece of property to keep for himself. Bennett actually left New Providence in about 1783, and moved to New York. And the property was inherited by Wells. And John Wells and his family lived there for many years. Wells Road is named after him. The property is now owned by the Jacos, and Teddy Jaco still farms there with a dairy farm. Here's the map of New Providence that Stafford made soon after Bennett and Cook bought the property. The green circle represents pretty much where the Stafford Hill itself is located. And this is the Hoosic River down in the valley. This rectangle is the 300 acres that Bennett saved for himself. I wanted you to notice that it extends both east, close to Stafford Hill, and west across the river, going over to where Route 8 is now located. The house that I just showed you that Bennett lived in is represented by this red rectangle. So let's take a look at another house that was on the Bennett property. Eunice, his daughter, was given this land in 1790, and she built this house. The photograph is from 1973. It's right on the western edge of Bennett's property. That arrow points to its location. Here's another photograph of that house from about 1910. And you can see that it's on a road with the trolley tracks, which is now Route 8. And the road going from it towards the mountains is Fred Mason Road. Here's what that view looks like today. Cars are coming out of Fred Mason Road, and the house is the blue house on the right side of the photograph. And so this is what the house looks like today. They've added an addition on the left side of the house, but the other aspects of the house have been left intact. Okay, the next house is on Stafford Hill. And the circle represents the land bought by current Captain Samuel Lowe. He had 200 acres. And he built this house in 1769. This is the oldest photograph I could find of it, from 1966. Here's what the house looks like today. It's been restored. I do have this photograph of the home. You can see on the side facing us, there were two front porches. I'm not sure who's in the sleigh. Probably one of the Jenks who lived in that house in more recent times. In fact, Jenks Road is named for the Jenks family, where this house is located. And in this photograph, their farmhand, George Hamburg, is on the left, and to the right of the team of horses is Jabez Jenks. Here he is on top of the new barn that he built. The barn has seen better days. The view from Jenks Road is still beautiful today, with Mount Greylock in the background. Okay, also up on Jenks Road, we have this home, the Nicholas Brown House, built approximately 1770. It's been completely restored by the Hitters, and this is what it looks like today. And here's some photographs of the inside. Notice the built-in bookcases, which was a common architectural feature when these houses were built. We have the original stone hearth. Next house is at the southern end of Stafford Hill Road. The Valentine Bowen home, built in 1776. I'm not sure why all the teams of horses are lined up here, but I guess the family was just showing them off for this photographer. The home obviously ran into some disrepair. However, when it was occupied in 1926 by this family, it still looked in very nice condition. It had recently been purchased and is being restored. The restoration included a new foundation as well as interior work. The walls have been stripped to reveal the original planking. There's some hidden gems inside, and I love the old wallpaper that was revealed. This was in one of the children's rooms. Notice the double pocket doors and the framing around the door. An unusual feature of the house was upstairs in one of the bedrooms. The windows are only 10 inches above the floor. I'm not sure what the reason for that is. It may have let in more light because the roof overhang would have blocked some of the sunshine if the windows were higher. So the house was built in 1776. It's 1796. And a similar house across town on West Mountain Road was built the same year. And it's almost identical. So I'm assuming that the architect or builder went across town and constructed this house. Okay, back to Stafford Hill again. So the first church was built in 1769 in New Providence. And most of the homes were at the top of Stafford Hill, but the church was down near the bottom of the hill on Jenks Road. And it was determined that a new church needed to be built. And so in 1786, they built the meeting house on top of the hill, very close to where the Stafford Hill Monument is today. So what to do with the old church? Well, it was voted that the church should be moved up onto Stafford Hill and used as a minister's house. John Wells and John Brown said the day when the church was moved was a beautiful one. The church was drawn slowly up the hill by 100 yoke of oxen and safely deposited where it now stands. This old map from 1794 shows the old road that went up to Stafford Hill. Now the red oval of squares is where the church was located, and the blue line represents the path up to Stafford Hill. That road is no longer there However, its location is still visible along the hillside. And this dashed red line shows you that road going up the hill. Notice the arrow on the right. When this photograph was taken, you could still see the Stafford Hill Monument from Wells Road. And this is what the home looked like. It eventually became a private home, and the family that lived there in the 70s moved away. The home came into disrepair, and the land was going to be purchased by the state as part of a game reserve. I believe it was burned down, and the local fire department used it as a training session. Right across the street was another home I want to talk about. This one was built by Dr. William Jenks in 1791. And this home is no longer there either. William Jenks, who probably built the house which was standing until recent times opposite the church or glebe lot, that's where the minister's house was. In 1810, it was occupied by Dr. David Cushing, who had married the widow of Dr. Jenks. Dr. Cushing was one of a long line of doctors and surgeons, there being one in each generation down. And it's a very interesting family. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Cushing family. First of all, Dr. Cushing had a son, Erastus, and they moved to the Cleveland area. And Erastus had a son who became a doctor, Kirk. And Kirk had a son, Harvey, who also became a doctor. And Dr. Harvey Cushing became very famous. The medical interests from the father seemed to go from generation to generation. And a proper marriage interest came from the mother. And I'll tell you about that story in a minute. But let's look at the accomplishments of Dr. Harvey Cushing. He was the father of neurosurgery. A stamp was issued in his honor. He was the first doctor in America to use x-rays. He was the chief surgeon at 3 of the most prestigious hospitals in our country, Peter Brent, Harvard Medical, and Johns Hopkins. He died in 1939 at the age of 70. So what about the 3 daughters? Well, they ended up marrying the richest and most influential men in America, mostly due to their mother, who seemed to push them in that direction. One of them married James Roosevelt, and after a divorce, married John Hay Whitney, one of the 10 wealthiest men in the world. Another daughter married Stanley Mortimer, and after he passed, she married William Paley, the founder of CBS. And the third daughter married Vincent Astor, who was worth $200 million in 1940. They were known as America's princesses, Betsy, Babe, and Minnie. This is the book cover of a book called The Sisters, which tells their story. Now, by the 1850s, most of New Providence had been abandoned. The hilltop was the original location of homes, but once the railroad came into town, it was the village that prospered. And some of the homes were actually moved off of Stafford Hill. This is one that's in Adams. that was originally on top of the hill. So back to Wells Road now, and we're looking at the Jesse Jenks home from 1790. It was lived in recently by the Cordana family and is still owned by them. Mr. Cordana let me go in and take some photographs of the interior. He's restoring it, and once they had removed the plaster, the original planking and fireplaces were visible. This was hidden behind one of the walls. Notice the hand-forged nails. Now, the largest plank in the house is 22 inches wide. It's a vertical plank going from the first floor through the second floor, all the way up to the attic. We went into the attic, and there's a couple of interesting features there. One is all the beams are placed into notches. However, they're not nailed. Mr. Cordana showed me that he could actually lift one of the beams up out of the notch. Another interesting feature in the attic was this water tub. The house got its water from a spring across the street, and the spring naturally fed water up into the attic. And from there, in this tub, it was then drained down into the various parts of the house. There's also some writing on the ceiling in the attic, which neither Mr. Cordana or myself have been able to decipher. Okay, leaving Stafford Hill, we're going back to the other side of Cheshire, to West Mountain Road, just about where Outlook Avenue comes down and intersects. And this house is known as the Mason Tanner House, built in 1815. The style is known as an eyebrow colonial. Notice the smaller windows on the second floor. There's also a beautiful barn that's been restored to the right of the house, which I'll show you in a moment. The interior is very rustic. Upstairs in one of the bedrooms, notice the wide planking on the wall. The eyebrow windows have an unusual feature. Notice the handle on the right side. They're actually pocket windows. You slide them to the left and they go into the wall. When I went into this house, the owners didn't realize that feature. The windows had been painted shut for years, and they didn't know that they actually opened by sliding to the left. So this is from that barn. It's used as a conference center. The house is situated on some beautiful property, and down below the house there's a babbling brook with cabins that have been built along the brook. I believe they can be rented by the night. Okay, the next house is further up on West Mountain Road. It's a restored salt box built in 1770. This photograph is from 1973. Here's what the house looks like today. This 9-window colonial was a very popular style in that time frame. 5 windows over 4. Some photographs of the interior with all the exposed beams in the kitchen. Notice the hand-hewn axe marks on the beams. The stairs going up to the second floor are kind of unusual. You go up to that landing, and then you can go left or right to 2 bedrooms on either side. This is looking from one bedroom across to the other. Okay, back down to more or less the center of town. This is also on West Mountain Road, very close to Route 8. And we have the Jesse Cole House, built in 1820. This photograph was taken in 1884. The woman standing at the gate is Jesse's mother, and the woman by the fence, I believe, is Jesse's grandmother. This part of West Mountain Road, by the way, was just finished about this time frame. Originally, West Mountain Road came down and intersected Route 8 by the Dairy Funeral Home, between the funeral home and the cemetery. Here's what the home looks like today. Now, there was a fire in that house in 1971. Tragically, Jessie died in the fire. She was an elderly lady at the time. There may have been a candle burning that started the fire. She perished. This is the newspaper article about that event. She was 97 years old. In the red rectangle are some interesting facts about Jessie. At the time of her death, Miss Cole was the oldest living graduate of the former Westfield Normal School, now Westfield State College. She taught in Cheshire until her retirement in 1941. I can tell you that she must have been very interested in Cheshire's history because I've come across several articles that she's written about the subject. Okay, right near that home is this house, the Cole Brothers Store, built in 1808 by Calvin Hall and John Leland Jr. It was a store from 1816 to 1913, and then became a private home and eventually the parsonage for the Baptist Church, which is across the street. By the way, we'll talk about Calvin Hall's home in just a moment. It's very close to this. And John Leland Jr. was the son of Elder John Leland, who was famous for the Mammoth Cheese event. I wrote a book about that event entitled The Mammoth Cheese Event When America Watched Cheshire. Another old photograph of that home from 1884. Jessie was born in 1874, and I believe she's one of those 2 young girls pictured in this photograph. The home became Cheshire's first post office in 1810. And there's a plaque over the door noting that it was the post office from 1810 to 1816. Some of the original artifacts in the home, the knocker on the front door, the handle, and the interior locking, the old key, still works. The original stone fireplace. Built-in bookcase. Okay, the next home is in the same area. It's actually at the intersection of Church Street and West Mountain Road. It was built in a little triangle of land. The road to the left would lead south, and notice across the street is another beautiful home we'll talk about, the Beechwood. And the road to the right would lead up the hill towards West Mountain Road and the Baptist Church. Today, you would be stopped at the red light at just about this location. The man walking on the left, that pathway is still there today. It's a sidewalk, and you can see the trolley tracks used that location. One of the companies that came into Cheshire came up Route 8 and turned down Church Street at this location. Sally Heath's mother was a sea captain's widow from Rhode Island, and it's rumored that the pirate Captain Kidd visited and buried gold under the stone at the front door. The circle from the old map shows where that Heath house was located. Now, if there was gold under the front door, it must have been found because the house was moved. Here's the location where it was moved to, at the corner of Church Street and Route 8. At the time, both were dirt roads. And the home was a parsonage for the Baptist Church for a while. It has since been razed and is no longer there. Okay, in the same location, we have Walcott's Tavern, built in 1795. And this was a stagecoach route along here, and there were actually a couple of taverns in the area, this one and Hall's. Now, the tavern had a store in that addition on the right, and it was eventually bought by Felix Petticlerc, who moved to town and became wealthy as manager of one of the sand companies in town. His story is in one of my books called Made in Cheshire. But when he renovated this property, he kept the bones of the house the same and just changed the exterior and the roof. Here's what his home looks like. You'll notice he put a mansard roof, which was a popular architectural feature at the time. The windows are in the same location. He did change the first floor windows into bay windows. Chimneys are in the same location. After being a private home, it was turned into the Beechwood House, which was a bed and breakfast. And then later became the Beechwood Nursing Home. And when that closed, it went into disrepair. And the home now is in such condition that it's going to be torn down soon. In fact, here we are in 2022, and the home is up for sale and probably will be raised soon. Okay, just next to that property was another home. Captain Daniel Brown built it in 1797. He was a very influential and very wealthy resident. The description of his property talks about it going eastward all the way down to the Hoosick River with beautiful gardens. After he passed away, the home became a hotel or inn. At this time, it's known as the Cheshire Inn when this photograph was taken. Later on, it became the Hoosick Inn, the Country Squire, and eventually was demolished. I don't remember the exact year, but it was approximately 2017 when this was demolished. It's across the street from the current Cheshire Fire Station. And right now it's an empty lot with a sign saying, "Welcome to Cheshire." Okay, just up the hill on Route 8, built in 1869. Notice the unusual tower architecture. The home had been remodeled over the years, an addition added. Windows had been changed to bay windows, but that unique tower is still there. The location of this home is somewhat hidden. Here's an old photograph of the Baptist Church in Cheshire's Town Hall from the 1860s, probably. And to get to this home, you have to go in between these two buildings. You actually have to go onto the parking lot of the Baptist Church and through this gate. Here's the home today. It was built by a very accomplished carpenter by the name of Brown, Worden Brown. This view is from Church Street. Okay, across the street, I had mentioned before Calvin Hall and Hall's Tavern. And here's a photograph of it. It was actually built in 1804. At one time, it was run by the Coles as Cheshire Cat Tea Room. The second floor was used as a meeting hall by the Mason Lodge. Now the halls commissioned paintings. And the 3 paintings are shown here. Apparently you didn't smile back then when you had a painting done. The painting of Laura was the largest. It was actually a little, almost 6 feet in height. And the only place in the house that it could have hung would have been in the stairwell. Now, the paintings were separated over the years, and someone did research and found the 3 paintings, and it was sort of a big deal when they were reunited in an exhibit in Cooperstown, New York in 1958. There's a fireplace from the inside. Notice the baking oven portion on the left. Okay, just up the street, another old home built by Allenson Dean in 1853. This home is unique for several reasons. One is that Allenson Dean owned both a lumber mill and a glass factory in 1853. And we'll talk more about how that influenced the construction of this home in a moment. It became known as the Cedars Guest House. And near the turn of the 20th century, it was a bed and breakfast, very popular. People from New York City would come up and stay in this during the summer months. In 1945, this photograph was taken. And just before the war, the home's heating system was converted from coal to oil. And then during the war, when oil was scarce, they had to go back to coal again. And then at the end of the war, they returned back to oil. I'm told that the pillars on the porch were made of steel or iron, and during the war, they were donated to the war effort when metal was needed, and they were replaced by these beautiful wooden pillars. The home was recently purchased by a couple from New York City, and they are restoring it. Notice the cupola up at the top of the home. We're going to go up there in a moment. It has a very unusual feature. There's the back of the house before the restoration. There are many fireplaces in this house. Now, I mentioned that Dean owned a lumber mill. Very unusual the way this home is constructed. Instead of vertical planks, there are piled 2x4s, real 2 inches by 4 inches pieces of wood stacked on top of one another. This must have added some insulation value as well as strength to the walls. A lot of wood went into the construction of this home because of this style. So we're going upstairs now to that cupola. And one of the unique features is a skylight shedding light onto the stairway. And I mentioned that Dean owned a glass factory. And that skylight is actually the floor of the cupola. It's made of plate glass. Plate glass is very thick, strong glass. And in 1853, when this house was built, Dean's factory was experimenting with making plate glass. They're known for making the first plate glass in America. I believe that they were experimenting, and during the construction of the house, he took some of that early plate glass and decided to put it as the floor of this cupola. When I toured the house, I told the family that they may have the first piece of plate glass ever made in America. Okay, just up the street, we have another beautiful home built in 1792. This photograph is from 1888 or thereabouts. Notice the horse and buggy coming out of the gate, as well as another horse and buggy near the front door. Now, this is the original home, but it was expanded. And so this painting of the original is now hung in that newly expanded home. And here's what that home looks like today. It's known as the Harbor Bed and Breakfast House. It was a 9-window colonial. The two big windows on the first floor were combined into one larger window on either side of the door. And you have the 5 windows on the second floor. And to the left of that window is where the expansion took place. So everything to the left is a new addition. Inside, it's a beautiful bed and breakfast. Again, these photographs are from 2015, when I was allowed to tour the house. Actually, my wife, Mary Ann, and I stayed there overnight. This is one of the bedrooms on the first floor. And this is one from the second floor. Another from the second floor. And yet another on the second floor. And the second floor bedroom again. The kitchen. Some of our breakfast. And finally, the owner's suite. The grounds are beautifully planted with flowers and other shrubs. Okay, just back down a little closer to town. is Richardson Street. And the next house we're going to look at is on the corner of Richardson and Route 8, known as the Greylock Villa, circa 1860, when it was constructed by the Richardson family. Notice the building to the right of the home. It's almost as elegant as the home itself, but it's the stable and carriage barn. It is no longer there. So the current owner, who runs it as a rooming house, allowed me to go in and take some interior photographs. The front parlor. Many people in town know it as the Doc Mayo's house because Dr. Mayo owned the house for many years. His family lived there, and he also had his doctor's office in one of the front rooms. Beautiful fireplaces. In this sitting room, which is next to the dining room, you can see through the doorway into the kitchen. That part of the house where the kitchen is part of a newer addition. This room here may have been the original kitchen. So going up to the second floor, I didn't go into any of the bedrooms. However, I went up to the third floor, which used to be the ballroom. And it's now turned into a game room, but it's a big open space where dances were held back near the turn of the century. The grounds. Now, after I gave my talk on historic homes in 2015, someone came up to me and said, "Have you heard the rumor that the villa was a house of prostitution?" I had not heard that rumor, but I like doing research, so I decided to see if I could determine whether it was true or not. I ended up writing this book, Brooklyn Comes to Cheshire. The story in the book is historical fiction, and I use photographs from 1893 to illustrate the story. And I also reveal the truth of the rumor. Thank you for listening to my talk on historic homes of Cheshire. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments, you can leave them on YouTube, or I can also be emailed at emery395@gmail.com. Thank you.